We had a great 4th of July, and now, as I'm recording this, it is July 5th, and I'm doing a combination Bible study for yesterday and today as we look at our reading from Acts chapter 23, 11 through 35. So here's the way we're doing the devotion today. I thought I would summarize the context of today's selection from the book of Acts. So we'll be going back over the past couple of chapters in the book of Acts. So here it is. After Paul gives a tearful farewell to the Ephesians with many expressions of affection, Paul heads to Jerusalem on a ship. Then, for a week, they stay in Tyre as the ship unloads its cargo. There were some disciples that were telling Paul not to go to Jerusalem. However, he persisted, and after a very touching send-off, comes to Caesarea next. A man named Agabus gave a vivid prophecy warning Paul not to go to Jerusalem, and the people once again with tears urged Paul not to go, but Paul said that he was ready not only to be imprisoned, but to die in Jerusalem if need be. So once again, he persisted. In Jerusalem, then, when he gets there, Paul was eagerly received by James, who was the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and the elders. This is when Paul purified himself and went into the temple to present an offering. That is when the Jews from Asia saw him in the temple and stirred up the crowd. The whole city was stirred up, and rumors about Paul swirled around. They seized Paul and were seeking to kill him. The tribune then came with soldiers to restore order and stop the mob from beating Saul. The tribune then arrested Paul and put him in chains, asking who he was and what he had done. The crowd was so rowdy that the tribune eventually himself had to be carried by the soldiers who were with him. When Paul was brought to the barracks, he got permission from the tribune to speak to the people. Paul then related the story of how he was converted to Christianity on the road to Damascus. So in chapter 22, there is another summary of this incident of Paul's conversion for us. Singing dust into the air. Must have been quite a scene. The tribune ordered that Paul be examined by flogging. However, when they stretched out Paul to flog him, he asked the centurion if it was lawful to flog a Roman citizen, and on top of that, one who wasn't even condemned. I'm impressed that Paul had the presence of mind to ask this question so calmly. That put a brake on the flogging, and the centurion went to the tribune, and the tribune found that Paul was even a natural-born Roman citizen, so those who had bound Saul and were about to flog him realized that they had made a grave error. Paul was then brought to the council. Once again, Paul had the opportunity to speak in his defense, and he declared that he had lived his whole life before God in good conscience up to that very day. The high priest Ananias commanded those who were standing next to Paul to strike him on the mouth. Paul replied quite boldly, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Are you sitting to judge me according to the law, and yet contrary to the law you order me to be struck?" When the crowds objected to Paul speaking to the high priest this way, Paul replied that he had not known that this was the high priest. Paul then, realizing that there were both Sadducees and Pharisees as part of the crowd, declared that he himself was a Pharisee and a son of the Pharisees, and that he was on trial in respect to his hope for the resurrection from the dead. As you perhaps know, the Sadducees and Pharisees did not agree about the resurrection, and so an argument between the Sadducees and the Pharisees ensued after that. And the Pharisees even started defending Paul at that point. Things got heated, and the tribune once again ordered that Paul be taken by the soldiers back to the barracks. The next night, Jesus once again spoke to Paul and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome." This really sets us up for the remainder of the book of Acts. And this is where the reading for July 5th starts in the one-year Bible. At this point, a group of more than 40 Jews hatched a plot and swore an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. Paul's nephew, however, heard of their plot to ambush Paul and warned him. Then this nephew told the tribune about it, and the tribune had 2 centurions and 200 soldiers come and take Paul on horseback to Felix the governor. The tribune also sent a letter along basically to show himself in the best possible light as he described the situation to Felix. So the soldiers made that trip, covering a lot of miles in the days that elapsed. So many miles that some people have questioned this account, but in other historical sources we see that Roman soldiers could easily on a march cover that much ground. Well, maybe not easily, but they did it with regularity. So the soldiers presented Paul to Felix along with a letter. So here's one final devotional thought on all of that summary of this section in the book of Acts. As Luke presents the wording of Lysias, that's the tribune, in his letter that he wrote, it is with certainly a bit of humor as we see how Lysias bends the truth to his favor. And as you well know, politicians are still up to the same old tricks. I can't help but think of, as I think of this whole section, of the cartoon Felix the Cat and his bag of tricks. However, Paul is totally different. He will tell the truth and will share the gospel, and he goes to Jerusalem to do so no matter the consequences. May God give us such boldness, especially as we share the gospel. For Jesus also speaks to each of us in his own word, saying, "Take courage." May God be with you and bless you, and I'll look forward to talking with you again